Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. We are here in the U.S. on the eve of Hanukkah. I believe where you are in Eretz Yisrael, it's already Hanukkah. I see the light on your face. You've already lit the first candle of Hanukkah. So we could say Hanukkah Sameach, Hafla'ah and Hanukkah, and any other Hanukkah greeting we would like to share. We are here to do an episode on the Hafla'ah. We have done episodes besides the Hakdamas that we've done to the Masechtas, going through the history of some of the Achreinim, Rishonim on the Masechta. We've done a few biographies. We've done the Aruch L'Ner, Rav Elia Gutmacher, the Nesivos, which hasn't been released yet, but we are here to do the Hafla'ah. Many people have heard of the Hafla'ah. He has a sefer Hamakne on Kiddushin. And that's where I think the impetus for this episode came from, even though we're already in Bava Kama. Panim Yafas Ala Torah, a Rebbe of the Chassam Sofer. So those are some basic biographical details that most people know. But as always, the Rabbi Doctor will take us down a highway of information that I at least don't know. And I'm sure many of the users from the feedback we've gleaned don't know either and enjoy listening to. So this episode has been sponsored anonymously. So thank you for the sponsorship, and we honor the anonymity. And thank you. Anybody who would like to be in touch with us to sponsor an episode, suggest an episode, questions, criticisms, and anything else, reach out to eliezerbroad@gmail.com or myself, shweidm@ou.org, and we will respond in kind. If anybody wants to join Rabbi Brut's mailing list, his email list, which has very, very interesting content mailed out specifically before Yom Tovim, eliezerbroad@gmail.com. Okay, so Rabbi Brut, how are you today?
Baruch Hashem.
Where would you like to begin introducing the Hafla'ah?
Okay, so as you mentioned, it's part of our series to go through the lives, the works of the great Achreinim on Shas. So, by way of introduction, I'm going to say as follows: this tremendous Goin, Pinchas Horowitz, author of the Hafla'ah and the Hamakna or Hamikna, is born in 1730, dies in 1805. He's very famous for authoring these classic works that we just mentioned on Shas, and also a work called Panim Yafas, and they're still learned daily worldwide. And he's also famous for being the Rebbe of the Chassam Sofer. But his history and life story is shrouded in mystery until today. It's even a hot topic, as I will discuss. An excellent work on the Rabbanim of Frankfurt, which is where the Hafla'ah ends up for the last 33 years of his life becoming the Rav. The Rav at the time, Rav Horowitz, writes all about the Rabbanim. In 1882, he is a son-in-law of the Aruch L'Ner, a Talmid Chacham in his own right. We actually mentioned a little bit about him in the episode in the Get of Cleves. And this Rav Horowitz, in his book on Rabbanei Frankfurt, he's the first big source that deals with the materials about the Hafla'ah. And he had Pinchasim of Frankfurt, which we'll discuss shortly. And but the problem is this work was written in German in 1882, so it's only first translated into 1972 into Hebrew, so it's not able to be used as much. For the most part, until the 1990s, no serious material about him was published. Then, in the Hasidic journal, Horowitz Beis Aaron v'Yisrael, which is based on, amongst other things, publishes manuscripts that is housed in the Stolner Rebbe's incredible Svarim library. Tons of materials of the Hafla'ah, not tons, but very important materials of the Hafla'ah was published, and series of articles dealing with him. Again, around 2010 till 2012, some more new, real, serious documentation was published from him. Previously, most of the material written about him was based on each person copying from the other, without checking into things, saying things that get embellished over time, and they're not based on real facts, as we'll mention a little bit shortly. Some of the recent discoveries are just fitting into the previous outcomes, even though they're not based on proper sources. They're not even using materials published back in 1882, even when it was translated in 1972. Now, in 2010, 2000 to 2012, so Reb David Kamenetsky, son of Reb Shmuel Kamenetsky, publishes 4 articles about him, first in Yerushalayim, then 2 in Yeshurun, and again in Yerushalayim, defending some of the sharp attacks that took place about what he wrote in some of these articles. Two articles of Kamenetsky are based on the Pinkasim of Frankfurt, which still has not been published in its entirety. Now, just to explain briefly, what does it mean, Pinkasim of Frankfurt? So we know a wealth of material remains on many cities. They had different Pinkasim. They could be Pinkasim of the Bezdin, the protocols, the back and forths of the Dayanim. There's all types of different Pinkasim. Many were destroyed in World War II, but many survived, and they exist.
To jump in, our friend Nachi Weinstein has had at least one that I can recall episodes on Pinkasim. I believe he had Professor Elisheva Kalbach, is her name, who has studied this, and it's very fascinating information.
Yes, yeah. Now, early historians before World War II a lot of times had access because they a lot of times researched their own cities, so they could use the Pinkasim. Some of those materials have been destroyed, but some survived. And in recent years, it's been a revival. Not only Professor Elisheva Kalbach, also there's, just to mention, a Pinkas of Metz, 20 years of the Bezdin of the Shargis Aryeh, was published in a beautiful, massive tome of an edition from Professor J. Berkowitz. Professor Moaz Kahana, who worked a lot on Prague and the Noid Yehuda's base medrash and the Noid Yehuda, discovered incredible documents about coffee, which is a fascinating story. And as we know, coffee is very important, but the story that he able to uncover from these Pinkasim is incredible. Bekitzer, Pinkasim has a lot of times information. A lot of information is boring, but there's a lot of exciting information. Like a lot of things you learn and you see, you could sometimes make amazing discoveries. Bekitzer, David Kamenetsky publishes the parts in the Pinkas of Frankfurt that relate to the Hafla'ah and the Yeshurun journal. I was told that Zalman Nechemi Goldberg, when he received this volume in Yeshurim in 2000, in those years, he was very, very excited. Everyone knows Zalman Nechemi was a son-in-law of Reb Shem Zalman Auerbach, was a tremendous dayan, and he felt these psakim and the materials in these Pinkasim were fascinating for him. Personally, I think based on that, it's very useful for dayanim to use these type of materials for various reasons, something I hope to deal with in an article that's hopefully coming out shortly. One last source that relates to this city, Frankfurt, is, and also Pinkas, is that Professor Edward Fromm published from a dayan in Frankfurt that was on this Bezdin of the Hafla'ah during these years, which also gives us a window into the issues of many different things that were going on in daily life at that time. And we'll get back to the points that some very brief points about it shortly. Now, what's the basic information about the Hafla'ah? So we don't have to look any further, is that he himself, in his introduction to the Kuntres Achron of his masterpiece on Masechtas Ksuvas, published in his lifetime, 1787, he writes, basically, who does he learn by? He says, Moiri Avi Moiri Hagoyim. And he learns by him, it sounds like, he doesn't mention anyone else until he gets married, and he's zeicha to sit and learn without interruption, and he has a brother, his older brother, Reb Nachum Halevi, and he learns with him for a year. This brother gets a job as a Rav, so he ends up going to his other brother. This brother is a famous Reb Shmelka Halevi, and they learn. He learns with him. He says, "This is the Hafla'ah saying this." They learn Shas Paiskim to learn the Amkus of Torah and Halacha L'Maisa. They get the Torah. They learn Even Ezer also a lot, and they ayin a lot into Hilchos. They start Hilchos Yavamis, Hilchos Ksuvas. All this is found in this introduction. Okay, fine. So he's clearly listing out who his Rabbeim are, and then he says that he publishes the Sefer. This is in the Kuntres Achron. This is in the back of his work on Ksuvas, which we'll discuss what this Kuntres Achron is in a moment. In the Hagdama to the actual Sefer, and now Ksuvas is a massive Sefer known as Shas Katan, which he actually talks about in his introduction, calling it Shas Katan. He writes in a very, very incredible Hebrew, a well-written introduction about his life, more details. Talks about that he was a Rav in two different Kehilos. Eventually, he gets an opportunity, small Kehilos. We don't even know much about it, but it sounds like he had Talmidim there, and he was able to learn Shas and Paiskim, Be'iyun, and he learned a ton from his Talmidim. And we're going to get back to that point in Mirza Hashem. And then, okay, fine. Eventually, there's wars, there's danger. He gets offered the Steller in Frankfurt, and it's a famous city. He says, and I take the job. Okay, he writes that he loves the job here. A lot of times, Rabbanim did not necessarily see eye to eye with the Kehila. From documentation, the Pinkasim, already from David Kamenetsky and others, we see that the Kehila loved him. How do we know this? They raised his salary more than once. This is also, if someone familiar with the history of Rabbanim, in general, this was not the case. Okay, anyway, during these years, he learned Shas and Paiskim with Talmidim. He has a yeshiva there. And he's Zeicha, and you see from him that the main thing was that he's able to learn with Talmidim, and they learn, he tries to learn the MS, fine. The Kitzer, he decides to put out his Chedushim, starting with Masechtas Ksuvis. He says, I learned in yeshiva, and he did great intense iyun in it. It's an amazing Masechta, he calls it Shas Katan, which we dealt with the origins of this Piskam, so to speak. He was a source that we mentioned. And eventually he hopes to print his other Chedushim on the rest of other Masechtas. And also he says he has writings, Perushim Noam al Sidrei HaTorah. Okay, Bekitzer, he deals with the name, why he gives it Hafla'ah, he has a Ramazim himself, his mother, his father, all these types of things. And Bekitzer, he publishes the Sefer. Fine. He also says to make sure to be ma'ayin carefully into what he says. And you, okay, I mean, say, don't just, if you find a mistake, don't assume it's a mistake. First be ma'ayin into hativ. Then, going back to the Kuntres Achron, he writes that not only did I feel that I have to learn Shas and Paiskim, about Shas, but there's also an aspect of Halacha L'Maisa, and that's what the Kuntres Achron is, intense iyun chibur on Shulchan Aruch. Dainu Hilchos in Masechtas Ksuvis, he goes through Sif in Hilchos Ksuvis be'iyun ad ma'id, and it remains a classic, and he writes Barichos in this introduction the importance of learning halacha. It's not only enough to just learn the lamdus, you also have to know halacha and come out with halachas maskanos. Okay, fine. Now this work becomes a classic, and we're going to analyze it more in a few minutes. Now, but it's first published in 1787. The question is, how does Frankfurt in the early 1770s, when they're seeking out a Rav, how do they hear about him? How is he so well known? He's a Rav, as I said, in small cities that no one really heard of. He's not a Talmud of any, as far as we know, of any famous people. So why does this city of Frankfurt, which is a prominent city, decide to pick him? And in general, this is a question I've mentioned in the past. How does a gadol become famous? So at times we know he writes a classical work, but as I said, it's only published 15, 16 years later. Sometimes he has Talmidim. Okay, but we don't even know much about his Talmidim. Sometimes it's through a controversy. And that gets us to, is there any controversies that we could link possibly to that flaw that could bring him to get to the ears of the search committee of the ear of Frankfurt? Okay. So here we quote the famous Rabbi David Katz. You've mentioned his different podcasts of his. So here his doctorate is devoted to the Noam Yehuda. And what's very significant to the doctorate, not only is it about the Noam Yehuda, it gives you a lot of times picture of that kufa. So he brings out that there was a massive controversy, one of the many controversies that was involved with, a pulmus that started in 1755. I'm not going to go into all the details of this pulmus because I hope to devote an episode about it at some point. But the point is that there was a Chashav Rav, Rabbi Yeshua Heschel Horowitz. He was married to a woman, and it sounds like it wasn't a happy marriage. He wanted a divorce. She didn't want a divorce. They didn't have children. But Kitzer, the uncle, is Rebitzel Hamburger. Rebitzel Hamburger is a very good friend of the Noam Yehuda from their days learning in the Klois of Bride. Okay, he's a Rav at the time, and he holds in the end that they could give a get, and they have to give her a get in a very mechudesh eifin, which basically is she doesn't want to take the get, so they have a get written up by Chashav Rav, the son of the Pnei Yeshua, and a shliach is made, and basically this is quoting the words of Rabbi Katz. She was accosted on the street and her arms were forcibly held by two Polish soldiers hired for the purpose. At that point, the agent thrust the get onto her person even as she screamed in protest. Okay, Bekitzer, she's divorced. This Yid, Rabbi Yeshua Heschel, he's a Rav in Galicia. He gets married. Okay, she was still very opposed to this. She said she had no right to get married, and she also throws in that she has a complaint that the document, as it was during this holding her down, it got ripped, and there's a whole demon that the get is ripped. Okay. Anyway, this was a pulmis. A lot of Jews are written about it. Many years later, it seems around 10 years later, the Noam Yehuda writes a tshuva. We don't know why he does, but this is his nephew, and he writes a tshuva saying that it's not a good get. Basically, the shliach is not a good shliach, and the course of this controversy, various inyanim and shlichus come out to Noam Yehuda and what the other gedolim at the time, such as the Rebitzel Hamburger, who is his friend, he's not only that, he's also his mechutin. Why? Rabbi Yaakov Landau, the son of the Noam Yehuda, is married to him. So this is a family feud, as they say, and a lot has been written about it. Okay. Who gets involved at one point? Hafla'ah writes a whole tshuva about it, bekovid gadol to Noam Yehuda, arguing on the Noam Yehuda. So the theory is, and this theory is proposed by Martha Horowitz and Rabbani Frankfurt, that this tshuva brought, this was a big pulmus at the time, and this got the Rabbanim of Frankfurt, and the city, they heard about him through this, writing against Noam Yehuda, so they realized he did it bekovid and everything, so he's a person to look out for and to try to get him to be the Rav. The problem is, it's a nice theory, but how in the world do they know this? They're not in the Frankfurt city, although they sometimes did get involved in different controversies, they're not involved in this particular controversy. The tshuva is not printed till many years later, 1837. What happened? They got the tshuva, they found out that Hafla'ah, the news said, Hafla'ah wrote this tshuva going up against Noam Yehuda, and now they said, we see, it's very strange, but okay, we don't know. Lamaisa, Horowitz downplays the relationship between the Noam Yehuda and Hafla'ah. However, the Hafla'ah and the Noam Yehuda, besides for being related, are close. What does it mean close? The Rabbi Yaakov Landau writes about his father. At one point, it seems Noam Yehuda wanted to write a chibur on Ksuvas. So his son said to him, what do you mean? There's already the Pnei Yeshua and Hafla'ah. So he says, even though that Rav Pinchas Halevi did neflois asa b'sifra Hafla'ah, still I have what to say. And then he says, Rav Yaakov Landau, he mentions the Hafla'ah as Shem Hagoin. Rav Pinchas Halevi Horowitz, b'chiba yesera v'ahava m'suteres b'kirus libay hatar. Basically, with great kavod, he's constantly mentioning him. This is what Rav Yaakov Landau says. He remembers all the years whenever it will come up about him. Fine. Anyway, as far as it goes, there's a famous legend, which I did not have time to discuss. What's the legend? The legend goes to the Get of Cleves. In the Get of Cleves episode, which I tried to jam in as much as I could into 1 hour, but there's a ton more to discuss. One aspect is that who becomes the Rav of Frankfurt, our hero of today, Rav Pinchas Halevi Hafla'ah. Why? So they say is like this. They were fuming at the Noam Yehuda, who's one of the Gedolim against the whole, who caused the whole tumult. So what happens? They made a takana that the Noam Yehuda, we spoke about this, that he can't become a Rav in the city of Frankfurt. Now you'll say, "What? Okay, we'll get to this in a moment, actually." But the point is that, so they didn't want any gadol that wrote against the Bezdin of Frankfurt a tshuva. So now they're looking for a gadol of major stature. Everyone, as we spoke about in that episode, pretty much came out against the Bezdin of Frankfurt. So who are they going to pick? Turns out the only person that didn't write a tshuva on the topic is Pinchas Halevi. Thus, the story goes that he sat down to write a tshuva against the same thing like the Noam Yehuda against Rabbani Frankfurt. Not once, not twice, not 3 times. The ink dried up. He took it as a sign not to write it. So the story goes that Rebbe Shemaifis, and this is why he did not. This is why he ends up getting the job, because he didn't write a tshuva about it. Okay, and the guys, when they spoke to him, they didn't ask him, "What do you hold about the Get of Cleves?" Okay.
So now I have to hear the Rabbi Doctor's real thoughts on the story.
I have no idea, but I'm going to tell you, Mamish. This is a thing you can never. This story is a very funny nakuda with this story. What's the story? A friend of mine tells me. In America, I'm from America. There's a paisik named Ramosha Heinemann. Okay, so Ramosha Heinemann, it seems people start writing up tons of psakim and shiurim of his, and they publish different contrasim of his. So the guy tells me there's a very interesting stuff. So I pick one to buy to test out. Hilchos Kishuf v'Avodah Zara. Okay, I start reading it. Fascinating material, mamish fascinating. And what do I find over there? He's talking about kameis. Okay, so shaila is if you can make a kameya. So basically, he brings the whole story. There was someone in the Aguda who was very sick. He says they asked him basically to write a kameya. So I wrote a kameya for him. He says I wrote it 3 times for him, but made a mistake every time. So I saw it was a siman min hashamayim. I should not get involved with this. I didn't try to write Kameyas again, and I don't do it anymore. So you'll say to me, this is Rav Moshe Heinemann speaking, it's nichash for me to stop writing a Kameya. just because I made a mistake 3 times? Well, there's a story of that flaw. The Kitzer, he brings down our story. There's some inaccuracies in the way he talks about the get of cleaves, but he brings down this Ma'aseh Shahaya, that he wanted to write it and the ink ran out, and he says like this: that Flo was the most unlikely candidate to become the Rav of Frankfurt. Why? He's a Talmud of the Mezritch Maggid, who's a Talmud of Baal Shem. He's a starker Chassid. Hasidus in Frankfurt, there's no connection. So Bekitzer, he's not even get the job. But Lamaisa, what happens? The ink spilled over the tshuva. Bekitzer, he took it as a sim Shamayim, and that's how he becomes the Rav. So he uses this as a psak for himself. He's not going to write, he doesn't write Kameyas because 3 times the Kameya got messed up, so he doesn't write it anymore. So this is a halacha maisa that I find it's hard to believe that anyone came. I mean, people in Baltimore that heard the shir probably know it. I randomly came across this story. Okay. Anyways, fine. But what about this connection to the Maggid of Mezritch? We're going to get to it shortly. Okay. Be that as it may, the city of Frankfurt picks him as the Rav. Why? No idea. Lamaisi, you have to understand, and this is a very important ukuda in the story that we're going to get to now, and that is Frankfurt is one of the most chashavist cities. It's not necessarily the largest city. Lamashal, Prague is much bigger, but you want to know something? I come across that a few years before the Get of Cleve controversy, before they got to Rav Avram Frankfurt, who becomes the Rav of Frankfurt, the Loichem and the Sugya of against the Get, they wanted the Noid Behuda. After he's Rav of Prague, they were trying to get him to become the Rav. They were scouting out for a Rav, and this is in the years in 1750 and 1759. So this is a city that's looking for good Rabbanim. Now they got great Rabbanim. One of the Gedolim over the centuries, the Shla, the Pnei Yeshua, was the Gadol Hadar, not at the time, without getting to Barichas, hopefully we will devote an episode just to him. He's one of the Rabbanim of Frankfurt for years. So this was a city that had the superstars. So they had right, and that's what they were looking for. In this Kufa, and this is a very, very important point that's been overshadowed, it's not been emphasized enough. At this time, and Hafla'ah is there, it's a chashava city full of tremendous Talmidei Chachamim. Rav Mordechai Horowitz lists out a bunch of them. There's a full bezdin of more than 6 or 8 dayanim. And there's kloizen at the time. If you look through the documents that David Kamenetsky publishes, there was at least 2 kloizen that were run with people learning mamish like kailos. This is a whole story of the kloizen in that period of time. This is like small little kailos that they had, where Lamashal, the brighter kloiz, we once mentioned in an episode, there was very chashuva people, it was funded by some rich people. Okay, anyway. Bottom line is, he must have had a great reputation. We're not sure what it's based on, but they definitely checked into him, and this is very important. They checked into him, and in 1771, he gets the job. Okay. Not only is he the Rav, he's the Bezdin, and he has a yeshiva. He always mentions it. As I said, even when he's handling the introduction to Ksuvis, and everywhere he's talking about Talmidim. Now, we don't know how many people are in this yeshiva. Not only that, we don't know any of his Talmidim that learned there, which is now. It doesn't mean just because he had a yeshiva that it's this massive yeshiva, 400 bachrim or something, but he had a yeshiva. Okay. Now let's, before we get into more, let's go specifically let's just devote very briefly a few minutes into the actual 2 famous chiburim of his. They're published many times, the Hafla'ah. Hafla'ah was first published in 1787, and in 1801, the Hamakna, where the Hamikna comes out. We have Hagoisove from Rabbi Kiva Baruch and Frankel. And you see already a few years after 1787, Gedolim are writing to him and saying in his chuvas that we have of his, Giva Pinchas. So we see that they say, "Oh, you're an expert in Even Ezer. We saw in your chibur on Ksuvis. So writing to you this and this chuva." Okay, so we see right away the sefer is being accepted, and that's one way of seeing that it's very popular. Another way is it was published many times. But Kitzer, Mechon HaMa'ar, in recent years, discovers much more material from Masechtas Kedushin. They publish it. They have Maharas of Achrayim. The Nesivis, who you'll have to wait to hear the episode on him. But in the episode on him, we discussed briefly, there's a work of Hels Yaakov. He's done a lot into the words Lamakna, Mamish, that kufa. So you see right away his material is being handled. The great Litvish Gadol Rabbi Shulei Diskin writes in a letter the Chashivas about getting the Hamakna. It's a famous sefer. Everyone's using it. Fine. But what's the Mahalach HaLimud of the Sefer? So just to mention briefly, when you look through it carefully, you'll be able to find there's a major emphasis on Yerushalmi. He uses Yerushalmi. Avada the Rishonim at the time. He's one of the first Svarim that are using Rishonim Keseder that were available to him. The Ramban, the Rashba, the Ritva. These are svarim that we spoke about in the episode Sai on Kedushin and Sai on Ksuvas. He has them and he uses them keseder. This opens up many doors to new Torah, and this is a whole discussion not for now. He uses the Shitim Kubetzes on Ksuvas. So much so, at one point he says, I just got the Simachti Shekivanti Ladas Hagdoilim because he saw in the Shitim Kubetzes, this Kash V'Shem Deranjba. Fine. The Sefer is done tons into the Shakavatari of the Gemara, Rashi, Taisis, tons into the Marsha, which we spoke a little bit the significance of this in the episodes of Rechaim Kanievsky. Hundreds of times he quotes the Marsha, but we'll see more about that prat soon. Now, the Pnei Yeshua is written in 1739, not so much earlier. So you'd say, what could you add? And you see already the Sefer Hafla'ah is a massive tome. And he deals with the Pnei Yeshua hundreds of times. So we see, the impact of the Pnei Yeshua, and we see that he still felt he has what to add. But he does it b'kavod mamish. No zilzal, no sharf l'shainis. Okay. And we see it's Ma'irdik Amkus. He also brings the Amshel Shloima, which is also unique for also a different story. But Kitzer, as I said, he's very into halacha l'maisa. He even devotes in both of the Chiburim, Saida, Makna, and Hafla'ah sections completely dealing with the halachas and kedushin. Fine. Just to mention, the introductions that he writes and publishes for the Hafla'ah and the Makna are incredible, with full of Torah relating to Limud Torah and other aspects, which we'll touch on shortly. Okay. Does he have any other chiburim? So the answer is, did he write on other Masechtas and Shas? From his Akdama already in Ksuvas, it sounds like he has other Ksavim. Okay, someone recently sent me a recent recording of Reb Shaul Alter from Ger. And Reb Shaul Alter was giving a shir in front of a Ger Bachram. This is taking place Rosh Hashanah time. Reb Shaul Alter he says he's telling them a kasha from the Hamakna. He says Hamakna, Hamikna. He says something called that. It's really Hamikna. Fine. Then he says, did you know that Hafla'ah wrote a chibur called Sefer Krisos? And he says, now, interestingly enough, I was not able to find that he wrote a chibur like this. I mean to say he cross-references in his writings all the time his other chiburim, but it's possible that he does mention even by name the Sefer Krisos. But he says, Reb Shaul Alter said that he heard a dealer had the chibur of the Hafla'ah on Gittin 40, 50 years ago, and then suddenly got lost. Sadly, it was bought by someone who knows what happened. Chaval, he doesn't care what it's worth, just publish it. It's beyond important, he says. Then he says, telling this to Talmidim, 16, 17-year-olds, you don't know that the chibur Hamakna is so sweet. The charifas in it is amazing. And then he says, on Rosh Hashanah, you could dip the challah into the sefer. It's azoy matok. He keeps on saying this. And then he's looking at these bachram and he's saying, it looks like I'm the only Meshugana that knows about the sefer, that understands the sefer. No one understands it. But then he goes on and gives a whole thing from the Hamak. Anyway, Balamaisa, is there other Masechtas from the Hafla'ah over the years published? And the answer is, yes, they found a different Masechtas, a nice amount of material, even on Baba Kama and Baba Metzia, so that justifies us, even though Daf Yomi is already learning Baba Kama, and we're doing it during the Baba Kama time. So there's material, a nice amount of material, and Mechon Amar prints this massive set, and in this massive set, they have all the stuff, like it's 8 volumes. Fine. Okay, Beseder. And then, as I said, in 1837, a tshuva sefer of his is published. Now, interestingly enough, to throw out there, I always have to throw out, Reb Zevin says that it's interesting. Sometimes you can have gedolim that one particular sefer of this becomes famous, and a different sefer of theirs is not known. He says, Lamashal, the Noidim Yehuda, the tshuvas Noidim Yehuda, unbelievable the impact. The tzlach, it's much less used. The Hafla'ah, barely anyone even knows that he has a tshuva sefer, let alone what the name is. But his Sefer Hafla'ah and the Hamakna Avad, everyone knows. There's different times, different reasons behind why certain writings of different Gedolim get more accepted. There's no real reason behind it. It's all tali in Siyat Tashmai. Okay. Anyway, up till now, I'm obviously avoiding, and now we're getting to the action over here, as they say. What's going on? Did he write anything else? The answer is everyone knows that he wrote a work you mentioned in the introduction to us called Panim Yafas Ala Torah. So through this sefer, we're going to get to what the controversy in recent years has been about the Hafla'ah, and we're going to get to a whole new nekuda in the Hafla'ah that made him also very, very special. And this is like this. When I mentioned just now that he has these Hagdamas, and these Hagdamas to the Ksuvas and to Kedushin, which are incredible. They need to be learned over and over. They have tons of nekudas with amkus about Limud Torah, and for Rabbeim also they should learn them in general, which I'm going to quote Mirza Hashem at this time, 1 or 2 things from there. But I mentioned he quotes the Marsha a lot. Now, Looking through the work, you'll find that Haggadah is beyond important for him. Not only is he concerned with every Gemara, Rashi, Taisis, and the Rishainim, but he's also every shtickle Gemara from Ksuvis and in Kedushin, which has a nice amount of Haggadah. He deals with it equally. And the Torah is beyond important. He always throws it into the mix. Okay, fine. So not only in his Chedushim, his Hafla'ah, and his Amakna, but in this Chibur al Torah, it's a tremendous work in the world of Haggadah / Machshava, beyond important. Okay, now this gets us to the story of the Maggid. I mentioned his brother. He says he learned by his brother, Reb Shmelka. Reb Shmelka, everyone knows, a Hasidic Yid, tremendous, one of the great early Hasidim, G'dayli Hasidim, Talmud of the Maggid Mezrich. And we have, to be clear, I'm saying this at the outset, we have linkage of the Hafla'ah and Hasidim and the Maggid Mezrich. Where do we have this? The Baal Tanya writes this in more than one place, and we have the Zechibah Menayos HaTorah from a Talmud of the Maggid Mezrich, and in his Hagdama he mentions that who did he see when he was by the Maggid Mezrich? He would say these two brothers, Rav Shmelka and Hafla'ah. So no one is denying that he saw. I mean, say no one's making up and saying the Hafla'ah never saw the Maggid Mezrich at all. Has nothing to do with him. What are you talking about? Okay, but Lamaisa, as the stories go, and in different parts, some groups of people make more stories than others, or really, I actually think all groups like to make stories about their Gedalim. So there's a whole genre of stories with the Hafla'ah and Hasidus. And if you look at the beautiful Parsha weekly Parsha sheets that comes out, Alam Latrufa from Bells from Antwerp, so they have write-ups in almost every issue about Gedalim, all types of Gedalim, not only Hasidische, Litvische, Svardische, and they're excellent write-ups always. So Lamashal, they have 2 articles way back about Hafla'ah. So right away, you have to understand.
I just want to stop you here for 1 second. This may be one of the first times you are quoting from Parsha papers and Parsha sheets. So people should take notice that you're suggesting and encouraging a certain Parsha sheet, Alam Matrufa, which I agree. I don't see it around a lot. It doesn't get put out of my shul, but it's fascinating content for years and years and years. And yes. I see that, happy to hear and see that you read them.
Yes, so the truth is that it's not always accessible for me. I wish I had access to it on a steady basis. A lot of times they do get to my shul, but a lot of times they don't. Sometimes they're available online. Sometimes they're not. They're very not. It's like you have to have yichus to get on their email list. Sometimes they add people to the email list. No, sometimes not. And sometimes they have mamish incredible material related to Daf Yomi, other things also.
So if anyone here is listening and has pull and connections to get Rabbi Dr. Eliezer brought onto the Alam Matrufa email list, please reach out.
Help him out. He doesn't have enough papers in his house. Just my wife might not be happy with you. Anyway, the point, actually, you could get it in PDF, so then it's fine. Anyway, so in this essay on the Hafla'ah, right away you could see the dagesh of this great Hasidic Gadol, the Hafla'ah, and they bring Makairis. Now, some of the Makairis are real, the Balatanyam and others the Torah, and others are much, much later, and their heart, again, doesn't mean that they're not real. They're okay, fine. If they were just those sources, we wouldn't even link him at all to the Maggid Mezrich. Okay, fine. Say that. Now, Lamashal, a chibur which I'm very fond of, the Ali Tamar, I quote it every once in a while, was a Rav in Tel Aviv. And this person was a Rav who had a massive Sfarim collection. And the whole Sfarim collection was donated to the library in Gush Etzion, in the yeshiva there. And you could see it till today. It's a Meyerdika library. So he had Meir G. Dias in Sfarim, and he brings also a whole thing about the Panami office. It's published. He writes the year it's published. He has the wrong year. But he says it doesn't have in it Torah of the Baal Shem Tov. It doesn't have anything of the Maggid. What's going on? Everyone knows that the Hafla'ah is from the Gedalim of the Talmidim of the Maggid. So he says someone told him, a Rav Rav told him, a Hasidic Rav, that it's said that in Wien they saw the Ksav Yad, the original Ksav Yad of the Panami office, and that they had. And in there is material from the Baal Shem Tov and from the Maggid, and it was taken out. It was censored. And he says there's probably much more. And he says this is a terrible zach. Roshai Yisrael are do censorship, and there's other Chassidish farm that also and Maskilim do censorship. Okay, Say they're fine. He brings down that someone mentioned to someone over here in Tel Aviv about a manuscript of the Hafla'ah. He didn't have money to buy it. So, okay, fine. So, but this story I'm quoting from Dali Tamar, there's other sources. There's the different Gedolim that said this, that it's Kiyadua, the Panim Yafis ala Torah, Avada had in it tons of Torah of Hasidus. It was taken out. Okay, fine. Now, I have found in my life many times people claim something, and simply careful searching proves that these claims that were said are not really true. We have a massive sefer in front of us. Okay, so first of all, let's go with the aspect of censorship. Now, no one is denying that he was by the Maggid. We don't know, but that's all we know. He went to the Maggid. How many times was he by the Maggid? He sat by him for how long? What did he exactly learn by him? What was his connection? But the sentiment that they want to make into him, that he was a hidden chassid all those 33 years that he's a Rav in Frankfurt, is a little stretch. But we'll see a little bit more about this shortly. Bekitzer, it's taken out. The materials are taken out. The question is, who's taking this material out? So at one point, they say his son took it out. Okay. Now, his son, we know, is already in Frankfurt with him, a tremendous guy. A guy that the Chassam Sofer writes about him, about him. The Rebbe Ephraim Zal Margolis in close correspondence with him, even does a shidduch. And Rebbe Ephraim Zal Margolis, his daughter, marries his son. I think it's his son. If not, it's his nephew. And the point is, we have his chuvas and we have his drush, and we know he took over his father's stellar when his father dies. Adam gadol ad ma'od, his drush lachmei toida is masuk midvash, unbelievable drushes and materials in those drushes. Not for now. But the point is, there's no way in the world we don't have any evidence whatsoever that he had anything against Hasidim, that he's going to censor his father's work. Now, you have to understand, the censorship is also more, because we said the Hafla'ah writes his introduction, who's Rabbi Amar. So the censorship took place in his lifetime. He didn't write who his Rebbe, the Maggid Mezrich, is. He only says his father and his brothers. Okay. Now, the problem is like this. When does the Sefer Panim Yafis come out, and how does it come out? So this is a fascinating thing, and this is actually what sparked my whole interest into going deep into the Hafla'ah, is like this. My hero, as you like to call it, Rebbe Ephraim Zal Margolis. He's always somehow going to get involved over here. But Kitzer, as I mentioned in the past, he made it his business to have to do with the Gedolei Hadar before him. At a young age, he's already in correspondence with the Hafla'ah. He is into the Hafla'ah. He loves the Hafla'ah. Okay? When the Hafla'ah dies, he makes sure to get the manuscripts of the Hafla'ah. He gets the manuscripts of the Panim Yafis. He is the person who publishes the Chibur, funds it, edits it, puts it out in 1825. Now, what's the problem? The problem is, without getting into it right now, is according to all Hasidim, one of the great Gedolim that's sympathetic, quote unquote, to use grubber terms, with Hasidim is Rebbe Ephraim Zal Margolis. So who's doing this censorship? So you mean to tell me Rebbe Ephraim Zal Margolis didn't realize that this work was censored, because it came, the way he describes it was a mess. Taka was a mess. So someone went, we don't know who this person is, but we chalk it up to the city of Frankfurt is this evil city. But I already mentioned in the outset, the city of Frankfurt at this time, this is not an evil city. It's a hush of a city who are in love with their Rav. So they're not, no one's tampering with the materials of that flaw that he's really bringing materials. So what's another nakud? They say there's tons of Hasidus in there, but you can't see it. The Rashi Tevis and the initials and all the pieces. So I challenge, and I'd be more than happy. I have no problem whatsoever if it is a Hasidic Sefer. Tell me, take a bunch of pieces and show me these pieces are straight up Yesodis from only found in Gedolei Hasidus. Not if I find that Gedolei Hasidus also go with Mahalchim and Agada that other people before Hasidim did, which has been proven Keseder. Take a piece, for many pieces, let's say known Torah, which is new pieces of the Maggid, so to speak, and show the Hashpah. It's yet to be done. Yes, in Horowitz Beis Aaron Yisrael, at one point, they try to find a few such pieces, but a few pieces doesn't make a difference. But we're going to get more into this in a moment. My point is, the censorship is a problem. You're accusing the son of the Hafla'ah, who's an Adam Gadol Ad Ma'od, or Rebbe Ephraim Zal Margolis. These are not people, at least for me, don't start up with them. Fine, Beseder. but whatever it is, you could always blame it on these unknown people, which we'll get back to. They have it worked out for them that they do have something possibly to blame it on. Anyway, the point is, let's go focus a drop on this work. What is this work? So the Hafla'ah, Panim Yafis, is incredible. I recently made a Seder to try to learn it weekly, and it's full of everything. Tons of Hasidus, I have no idea. But Kabbalah, Arizal, yes, those pieces go way over my head. But there's tons of regular fascinating ideas and tons of stuff handling in the Lamashal Chumash Bereshis, everyone knows, and we're going to get to an example of a chiddush that he says shortly. Avos Kiyum Kol Torah Kula, before Matan Torah, all the Yeshivish Torahs, that we have endless amount of literature from the Prussia's Drachim and onwards. How did the Avos were Mekayim Kol Torah Kula based on the Gemaras and Chazals about it? And he has these three famous drushes, and we have Rabbi Yosef Engel much later on dealing with it, and Svarim and mamish endless literature about it. And I hope to deal with it in an episode shortly. But the point is that he in the Keseder Chumash Bereshis, he's constantly dealing with it and how he's learning it up, and he's showing shtickle tires of his and his Hafla'ah and his Mamakna, unbelievable stuff going on. How he's medai careful reading the psukim. Okay, Rashi, Ramban, Onkelos, he deals with all these things. Mefarish Midrashim, Beseder. Okay, but what makes this chibur that it's so incredible? So, interestingly enough, one day, a few years ago, I decide to pull out the Sefer. And I start looking at the Sefer. I'm trying to forget about it. At the time, all the articles about it, so I shouldn't have try to remove myself from any bias, whether it's a Hasidic work, whether it's a Litvish work, whatever the work is, it's a work. It's an unbelievable work. Okay, what is the work? And all of a sudden, I'm starting to look at, and I see Keseder in Chumash Shemais. Tons of times, it's handling mechiltas. I get to Vayikra, tons of times handling Teres Kayanims. Okay, Bamidbar. Also, again, Midrashi Halacha, Keseder, tons, mamish tons. I recently decided to do a computer search hundreds of times. Okay, not one vart, two varts. Okay, so you have a nice tickle tire. What passage the Sefer is? Fine. So I go back to my hero, Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Golis. So Rabbi Ephraim Zalman Golis, as I said, he's the person who publishes the Sefer and funds the Sefer. He's trying to talk, and he's a chassid of the Hafla'ah mamish. If someone wants to read the 3-4 pages, not 3 pages, it's close to 10 pages that he wrote about the Hafla'ah and the chashivos and the Sefer and his own Tyrus throwing it in. He says about the Sefer. What is the Sefer? He says, Ginzei starav berazei oilam. Then he says he's mefarish mekrois, remazim, gematrias, parparois. Okay. And then he says, V'amaris Tyrus memories chamurais asher b'mechilta v'Tyrus kayanim. I don't have to go any further. I was mechavan to my hero. I look further in the Haskamas. Now you have to understand, the Hafla'ah, as I said, he's this guy in Olam. Who does Rabbi Ephraim Zalman make sure I think he must have been behind in getting this. So first of all, the first Haskama of the Sefer is from the Abderav. The Abderav writes, "My Yedid Rabbi Ephraim Zalman, Abderav Chassid." So we see again the point I'm bringing out, the ties of Rabbi Ephraim Zalman to Chassidus. He doesn't mention anything. You're putting out the Maggid's biggest Talmud, the Gavaldik Chassidus Sefer, or where are the Chassidus Sefer? Nothing. Fine, say it. Then we have Askama, a beautiful Askama, Rabbi Kiva Eger, and we're going to see Rabbi Kiva Eger and the Hafla'ah Panim Yafa shortly. Gavaldik about it. We have the Nesivas, again, Gavaldik Askama. We have the Chasam Sofer. The Chasam Sofer writes, it was given to Kadosh Hashem, Yedid Nafshi, Agoin, Meifas Adar, Reb Zalman Magolis, and Baruch Hashem, he puts it out. So for the Chasam Sofer, it's not a big deal. We're going to get the Chasam Sofer is the Talmud. Okay. Who do we have another Askama from? Baruch Tumim Frankel. Again, what does he say? Oy tarvina peroisa bechedushim al mechilta v'toyres kayhanim asher behema flialasas vigdul tashia hagoyna mechaber. Again, Baruch Tumim Frankel is very, very sympathetic to Hasidim, his ties to the Sanzerav through Mishpacha. So the point is, this Sefer, they learned the Sefer. They knew what the Sefer is, and that's what they say the Sefer is. So even if you're going to say there's really these Kabbalah and Hasidus, now I can't talk about it. First to admit, the pieces are above my head in the first place. So, but the point is, it's not Hasid. Okay, 1 minute. But what's going on? What happens over here? So first of all, we have to understand, is there any conclusion to the story of these missing pieces? And more than that, what's going on over here? So the answer is like this. So first of all, one nakuda that I really need to be madgish. So sorry, one nakuda is, I'll fast forward to the end and then we'll go back to the theory, because the theory is important anyway. And that is like this. The fast forward to the end is 2010. It turns out there is a manuscript of the Panim Yafis, which has materials not found in the Panim Yafis, a whole volume of material. There's a Chashava journal that came out for a long time from the Bab of Hasidus called Kerem Shleima, and there's Kaseda, there were many pieces of the Hafla'ah that were not found in the Panim Yafis. Turns out there was a Bab of Chassid in Belgium that had the Panim Yafis al Torah in his collection. How he got it is mysterious. I can't get into the details right now, but the point is that he had it. Eventually it ends up, it seems it's in Borough Park, but Lamaisa, Reb David Kamenetsky, located the manuscript, a copy of the manuscript, and what happens is in 2010, 2012, part of the set on the Panim Yafis put out by a Yid, a Satmar Chassid from Meir Shahar. His name is, this person needs Mamish Meridik credit for his job. I believe his name is Rav Gross. His name is Rav Avram Gross. Rav Avram Gross decides to learn the Panim Yafis Mamish Be'iyun, and he puts out 5-volume work on the Panim Yafis, and the Nakud is like this. The Panim Yafis is Kaseder throwing himself all over his Yesaitis all over, and he writes very bekitzer. So he throws you if there's an Arizal, if there's a Zayar, if there's a Chazal, if there's a Panim Yafis somewhere else that could help you understand it. It's incredible to use this work. It helps you understand the Panim Yafis, because a lot of times he could write a few more lines in a different place that sheds light into it. Other times it's based on a Yesai that he said elsewhere. So this fellow, Kamenetsky, hooks up with him, and he publishes the missing work, the edited piece, volume of the Panim Yafis. Again, what do we find here? So this is a Chassidish Yid. He claims there's Chassidus in here. It's yet to be proved. It seems it's heavy Kabbalah. The Chassidus part, it's very hard. Again, there's no names, there's no nothing. Okay, and the answer is it's not true, at least in my opinion, my biased opinion, that there was no censorship whatsoever of taking out names of the great Hasidic Gedolim beforehand, or materials that might be claimed to be Hasidus. Okay, but now what's going on? And this is, we'll get to the last 2 Nakudas that we have 3 more Nakudas with the Chassam Sofer to reach the end. Number 1. I keep on saying that this city is a Myrdik Tyrdik city. You have to understand, people that read the Chassam Sofer is proud. The Chassam Sofer is born in Frankfurt. That's where he gets to meet the Hafla'ah. Calling him one of the main people he calls Mayri is the Hafla'ah from these years. He never goes back when he leaves at 19. And he's proud of this city. He holds this is a hush of a city. So we have to understand, we're talking about, this is the period of time that Hafla'ah is getting hired. This is the time that Hafla'ah is active. It's a hush of a city. It's not a problematic city. As I said, there's Tanja Talmidei Chacham in the city. Okay. And the Chassam Sofer always called himself a Yelid of Frankfurt, a hush of a city, Frankfurt. Okay. So what's going on over here? Turns out like this, a tragic story happens. And this story is like this. Horowitz Beisar Yisrael, they discover a letter from the great Gadol, which we mentioned a little bit about him in the episode of the Get of Cleaves of Yosef Steinhardt. So this great Yekish Goyin basically they found a letter where he's writing to Reb Nosson Maz, who we also spoke about in the Get of Cleaves episode, about what's going on. There's something going on in the city of Frankfurt. When is this happening? A few months after the Hafla'ah is in the city. So the understanding is that basically that Rabbi Yosef Steinhardt was writing to the Noin Yehuda, telling him to tell the Hafla'ah, you're a Chassid, pretty much. So you come to the city of Frankfurt, Hasidus is not for the city, and don't do or act, do Hasidic things openly, don't have anything to do with Hasidus. Now in those years, what's happening is, and this Rabbi Steinhardt mentions it, and Nosson Maz has it, there is a chibur floating around. This is right when the first Cherem against Hasidim came out, Zemer Aratzim, which talks about the various tainas that the people in Lita and Galicia had against Hasidim. So the fear was, Pinchas Alevi, Talmud Muvak by the Magen Mezrich is coming in, and he's going to fear us, and he turned Frankfurt into Hasidic city. So tell the Noin Yehuda to, okay, write him a letter. We don't have this letter in Noin Yehuda. The problem is like this. When you read this letter carefully, this letter is talking about something else. Most of the letter is dealing with a Yid, Reb Nosson Adler. Who's Reb Nosson Adler? So anyone who knows anything about the Chassam Sofer always knows the Chassam Sofer's Rabbi Muvak is Reb Nosson Adler. Reb Nosson Adler is this tremendous makubal who did all types of mishundik on Haggis. Lamashal, he reinstituted duchening daily in his place. Where is Reb Nosson Adler from? the city of Frankfurt. He's born in Frankfurt. He's a Talmud amongst others, I think even from the Pnei Yeshua, and also a Talmud of a Chashuv Yid, a friend of the Hafla'ah, Reb David Tevli Schiff, from descendants of the Ram Schiff. Anyway, this time explodes a controversy against Reb Nosson Adler, which we're not going to get into all the details, but the point is that he was doing all these Hasidic-like Hanhagas, and these materials and this pulmus was happening literally in that kufa, and they were getting very nervous about it. Reb Nosson Maz in Frankfurt was getting very nervous from Reb Nosson Adler, and you have to understand they come from the same base medrash, so this is fascinating. They're seeing it, and they were getting nervous. He was learning Kabbalah with Talmidim. They were doing various things that they're mentioned in the Chiburim on this topic that came out, and we're not going to go into all the details of this pulmus, but they basically rocked the city of Frankfurt at the time. Mamish Nakudis that were raised in the Zemar Ratzim, which was for a different pulmus of Hasidim. There was Hasidim called, like Reb Nosson Adler, Hasidim in the term, people that were being noyeg kol minei dvarim of Kedusha in his private clothes, which in the city of Frankfurt they got very nervous from. So basically, it's not that the Hafla'ah was the one that was being accused. If you read this document very carefully, as far as I'm able to see, it has nothing to do with the Hafla'ah. It has nothing to do with them shutting down. Kilu, they want to say that what happens is that the Hafla'ah comes in, gung ho, Hasidit, no, be quiet, don't talk about it. So basically, he gets the job. Now you have to understand, Reb Nosson Maz, who's the loichim against Reb Nosson Adler, he's the one behind him Hafla'ah getting the job. So they know he's a Hasidic person, or so to speak, and they still take him, but then they right away shut him down and say, make sure, don't you ever say a word, anything Magid, I don't want to hear a word, or you're going to get booted out. Ridiculous thing to say that. They're going to say this on the Gadol that they Dafka hired beyond chutzpah. Not only that, tons of things are meant. This Pinchas has in depth about the pulmus of Nosson Adler. Never once does it say, by the way, we said to that flow when you come, by the way, you didn't realize you're getting a job over here. Don't say a word, anything Hasidish over here. We're going to throw you out. This is a city, Tyrdik city. They didn't know anything about Hasidim. They had nothing to do. Hasidim never came to this area in Germany. Okay. Anyway, the point is that there's a lot to say about this. There's a lot written about it. The Pulmus of Nosson Adler is its own episode. We're not going to do that. Let's just conclude with the last three Nakudas briefly. And that is as follows. Number one, the Panim Yafis, as I said, it deals with the sugyas of Avos, Kaidim, Matan Torah. So, as I said, there's a ton of literature about it. So there's a fascinating chiddush that Hafla'ah says numerous times, and this plays out in a halachic controversy that took place a few years, 20, 30 years after he was nifter. And that is as follows. We know there's a diyun if you're allowed to be Mekayim the others, how do they do Shabbos? So Hafla'ah says like this, that we know how does the Jewish calendar work? It goes the night and then the day. So the way the others kept Shabbos is they did the day and then the night. So then it's not a problem because they weren't doing Shabbos the way it was after Matan Torah. There's a chiddush nifla of Hafla'ah. Rabbi Kamnetsky in his Emes Liyakov, a few places, mechavan to this himself. Now, this actually plays out in a whole famous controversial diyun between one of the controversial pieces of the Rashbam and the Ben Ezra Zigros HaShabbos. We're not going to get into that. But does this have any halachic nafkaminus? Turns out it does. Basically, in the 1840s, there was a Ger Tzedek, a guy who was looking into being Megayer and everything. And he on Thursday, it seems in the beginning of the week, he gets the Mila, but it wasn't healed properly. So he couldn't go into the mikveh yet. Come Shabbos, what are you going to do? A kitzer, Reb Shmuel Salant was away fundraising. This is taking place in 1848. He's fundraising, and the shaila was this ger is getting sick. What should you do? And the point was, he said, "What do you mean? You did the milah, but you didn't do tefillah, so you have to be mechal Shabbos. Yeah, goysha Shabbos is chayiv misa, so you still don't have a din of a Yehudi." A kitzer, this psak, he gave a whole psak, and it's given a tumul nifla in that time in the journal, which we spoke about in the episode of Aruch LaNer, Shemitziam and Neman, and everyone mixed in. Fine. The great Rabbi J.D. Bleich in Contemporary Halachic Problems has a whole massive piece about this. So 9 different mahalchim and achronim about this. He tells two over here, that flaw, that what someone wanted to tell to this Hafla'ah, that you see that before what a eitzah that this person could have done, that he wouldn't be considered Goysha Shavas, would be to keep Shabbos in this Eifin. Fine. He says Rabbi Kiva Eger turns out doesn't like this. He says, and Rabbi Kiva Eger has this tshuva, Simon Kufchaf Aleph, which is anyway, Rabbi Bleich doesn't mention, but it turns out it's a fascinating tshuva because it got mistaken to be in the tshuvas of Chaim Volozhiner. Whatever, not for now. And bottom line is, the Rabbi Kiva Eger in the back writes that the Panim Yafis, he brings down this Panim Yafis, he says he doesn't like it, he has a why not? Fine. Anyway, point being that the Panim Yafis I'm just throwing out a nakuda how the Panim Yafas is out halacha l'maisa. Okay, fine. Just fast forward. The pulmus of Haskalah is one of the famous pulmusim that the Hafla'ah does get very involved with. He's anti-Naftali Wiesel, Wesley, whoever you want to call him, the beer of Mendelssohn. He gives a famous drasha to Chachas Musar, published first by Horowitz and Yisrael. The Panim Yafas, this new edition, this new volume that they discovered in 2012, so to speak, they put it in for manuscript, Irish. Okay, anyway, lots of different things about it. We're not going to go down this thing because I hope to actually, in a series of mine that I hope to start releasing on the Nine Yehuda, eventually to deal with the whole pulmus of Haskalah, of Naftali Wiesel and the beer, and what Reb Hafla'ah's role in this was. Okay, fine. But the point over here is, and this leads us to our end, is the Chassam Sofer. And that is like this. As I said just now, he's anti the beer, he's anti Wesley. So there's a vart the Chassam Sofer is supposed to say over that he heard from his Rebbe Hafla'ah that if you find a person wrote a chibur, but he doesn't publish anything on halacha or on Shas, but he just writes about Torah, it's a problem. And he says this is when did Hafla'ah say this? In the times when the Sfarim of Mendelssohn and Wesley came out. Okay, so fine. Lamaisa. So we see that, and it's matim possibly to what we know about some cipher in the sugya of Mendelssohn, which is also, it's a massive own story. Okay, fine. Now, the Hafla'ah, once it comes out, as I said, he gives this beautiful haskama to Rabbi Chaim Zalman, and the point is that he's using it all the time. There's even a makar that says that he quotes it in all his drushes from the 1820s and on, 1825 when it's published. He's quoting it all the time. Interestingly enough, when he talks about his Rebbe Hafla'ah and also Rasanel, he says he never heard him say publicly the Sefer HaZayar in a drusha. Interestingly enough, in that drusha that I said that was published, which is one of the only drushes we have, the Hafla'ah, against Haskalah, there he quotes the Zayar a few times. As I said, in the Panim Yafas he says it a bunch of times, but who said he said those names when he spoke on Chumash and Shul? But in this drasha that's published that he gave in 1780s, he quotes the Zayar a few times. Okay, but this is a famous thing of the Chassam Sofer. Fine. Now this is, and this to conclude with this Nakuda, and this is as follows. The Chassam Sofer is the Talmud of the Hafla'ah. We don't even know exactly how much he learned by him, when he learned by him, but what's famous is, and as I said, we don't even know who the other Talmidim of the Hafla'ah is. And this is a Yisai, these last two sentences is a murder insight in general that Hafla'ah punkt says. Number one, I said is, if you look in the Hafla'ah, there's Hamakna. So in Hamakna, Ois Mem Gimel, he talks about a question that many people in Chinuch grapple with. First, some people grapple with, should you go into Chinuch? Because it's going to affect a Yerida in their learning. When you learn with Talmidim, it's not the same. Zakta Hafla'ah, that should not be a cheshbon. When you learn with your Talmidim, you have to understand that you're not going down in a darga through your Talmidim, unbelievable tayelis, and you don't go down at all. Don't worry about it, says the Hafla'ah in beautiful language. Then the Hafla'ah says in his Hafla'ah in his introduction, this is, I believe, in Ois Chaf Tes, he says that you should know that you get much more from the Talmud than the Talmud gets from you. And we find this concept many times with different Gedolim that they say that the schus that they had being a Rebbe is unbelievable. So to conclude, the Hafla'ah, we don't even know. We know that he's as a Rebbe, Rosh Yeshiva. We know he had his chibur. But who's the person that we know? The Chassam Sofer. Who's the Chassam Sofer? No one is on the darga to talk about him. But if that's your Talmud, it was definitely worth it. And we see the words of Hafla'ah were definitely Mekuyim with this Talmud the Chassam Sofer. Anyway, obviously, the Hafla'ah, there's many more things to go down. The Pinchasim that I said, or David Kametsky publishes. We have mercy on the audience, but these are just some of the issues to discuss with the great guy of Hafla'ah, and some of them hopefully we will return to in the future.
Wow, this was a packed episode. I haven't seen you animated and excited while discussing a topic.
I have to be very careful. I might get banned from this episode,
Yeah, no, this really brings out your fire and passion a lot more than discussing manuscripts, old manuscripts.
I'll tell you, I'll be honest like this. I was very controlled, just to be honest. Because I'm being recorded, I have to be controlled. If I wasn't being recorded, forget about it. But anyway.
That's exactly my point. This is with being controlled.
Correct.
Anyway, do you want to quickly turn around and pull out a sefer?
Yeah, give me 1 second. As we're talking about the Horowitz Yisrael Journal, So it's still current today. One could sign up, and I think you can get it. It comes out once every 2 months. So over the recent years, I see a fellow, Yosef Saprin. He's writing about Kaddish. Everything about Kaddish, these massive articles. Okay? All of a sudden, I see, and it's not the first work, but I see a over 500-page work from this fellow all about Kaddish. Mamish everything. Yesoidis v'klolim halachos v'minhagim minyani amiris Kaddish from Zman Chazal ad Yameinu. And it looks beautiful, where he basically goes through the Rishonim. He deals with Kaddish Yasim, all Kaddish, everything he deals. He has sections devoted to Kali Kaddish, Mishas Harambam, Benagi Taiman that go like him, the Ravid, the Maril, everything, Kabbalah, the world. When you say it, when don't you say it? All different aspects. It looks like a very well done likut. It's printed very nicely and looks like it's worth mentioning. It looks like this, and as I said, since we quoted a bunch of things from the Horowitz Beis Aaron V'Yisrael, some of the articles of this chibur were published originally in the Beis Aaron V'Yisrael.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. This episode probably won't be out and published on Hanukkah, but I can wish you a happy Hanukkah anyway, and thank you very, very much.